Meeting to order. No, not yet. Okay, calling the meeting to order. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, May 19th, 2021 electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission. This meeting is being held electronically to protect public health and safety due to the COVID-19 virus and to comply with orders issued by the Governor, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and the Washtenaw County Health Department. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 938-5500-0748. Kayla, will you please call the roll?
Yes. We have received regrets from Commissioner Dolan, who is unable to join us this evening. I will now call the roll. Please say here when your name is called. Commissioner Balderrama.
Here, calling in from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Commissioner Boland.
Here, participating remotely from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Councilmember Briggs.
Here from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Commissioner Felt.
Here from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Commissioner Hadimaki.
Here participating from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hull.
Here participating from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Kleinman.
Here participating from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Lee.
Here from Ann Arbor. Thank you.
Commissioner Parsons.
Here participating from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Smith. Not yet. Commissioner Summers.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hess.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hutchinson.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Margolis. Lieutenant Mike Sherba.
Here, remotely from Fenton, Michigan.
Thank you. Commissioner Stupka. And I'll circle back to Commissioner Smith.
Here from Dexter, Michigan.
Great. Thank you. We have a quorum.
Great. Thanks, Kayla. So now it's time for approval of the consent agenda. Are there any modifications to the consent agenda? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented? I think Parsons, seconded by Briggs. All those in favor, please physically raise hands. Great, all those opposed? And the motion passes, or consent agenda is approved. Ooh, I'm slow tonight. Okay, now it's time for public comment. This is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 938-5500-0747. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. Do we have any public commenters tonight?
We have no public commenters at this time.
Okay, and we'll do as we've done before, and if someone has had trouble calling in or pops up later, we can make time for that. So now we invite Transportation Engineer Cynthia Renninger to present an overview of the Highway Safety Improvement Program grant application process.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. Just so that everyone knows, my name is Cynthia Renninger, and I am one of our transportation engineers here at the city, and I work a lot with our safety data and with the HSIP application every year. We wanted to take an opportunity to, take the opportunity to just discuss with you the applications that we've put in for this year, and also to answer any questions that you might have about the process. I know that in your packet for this month, you received links to the call for this program. This program it's a federally funded program, and it is administered for the federal government by the Michigan Department of Transportation in Michigan. And in that call letter, if you had an opportunity to take a look at it, there's a little bit of information about the types of projects that they're looking for. It is a fiscally constrained program, and the program does have targets, spending targets, and those are the types of projects that they're looking for each year. Those targets are informed by the state's strategic highway safety plan. And there are three distinct paths that you can take to apply for these funds. You can either do a general application. You can do a streamlined application, which requires a little bit less work and documentation, but it is for targeted areas. And then there is also a high-risk rural road application. As all of our area is urban, we do not qualify for that program. So we put in 2 applications this year, and the process that we went through to identify those projects this year relied very heavily on the work that was done supporting A2 moving together toward Vision Zero and the plan that was just approved by the Transportation Commission and Planning Commission. And the work to identify those Tier 1 and Tier 2 corridors. So we looked both at, what locations we had on those high-ranking safety areas, and we also looked at our CIP. So we try to be a bit more strategic this year and really look for projects that worked well within the bounds put on the program by MDOT and were supporting both our new Vision Zero plan and could be incorporated in work that was already planned for the CIP. So the big project that we put forward is a general application, and that project is for State Street, and it is partnered with these are all for federal fiscal year 2023. So it's partnered with a project on State Street that goes from basically what we are looking at is from the Stadium Bridge up to South University. And there is a gap in the resurfacing project that is in there and the other work that is already planned in the CIP. But what we will be looking at is improving uncontrolled crossings. So we have a suite of improvements that are included in that proposal. We have bump outs, we have positive contrast lighting, we have our RFBs that are all installed in there to be installed as part of this project, and to bring all of those intersections up to a higher level of design and a consistent design across that corridor. The second application that we put in was a streamlined application, and that application is also partnered with a project that is currently in our capital improvement program as well. So it's just a brief overview of what we have in for this year. And I'd love to answer any questions that anyone has about the process or the program or the projects.
Great. If you're comfortable, you can call on folks as they raise hands, and we can just
Sure.
maybe go a little bit faster. So any questions?
I'm comfortable with that.
Great, thanks.
Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. That sounds great and exciting. Thank you for doing that. And this is a little tangential, but it seems like a good time to ask since you're talking about the Highway Improvement Program. I was at the Watts Policy and the liaison to the Watts Policy meeting, and we were talking about the extra money that Watts is going to be getting. And one of the pieces that had come up at the March meeting for the policy committee was that there was a desire to do work on Reimagine Washtenaw. But it sounds like on some of those projects, and in between March and now, it sounds like there's been a little bit of outreach to AATA and MDOT, and it doesn't sound like they've identified necessarily shovel-ready projects along Washtenaw that might be eligible for that. I was just curious if from like the city side, you know, if we thought that we had work that we could do there. And you could follow up with me later too, if we don't want to take the time to do it right now. But I was just kind of curious because it relates to this program too.
Raymond, do you want to give me an assist on that one?
Yeah, I missed some of the conversation, but you know, as you know, Washtenaw is a state trunk line, and so we sometimes have to do a higher level of coordination with MDOT on those projects. I will let you know there are discussions happening right now about looking at a project along Washtenaw, a joint application to a federal program. Possibly, we're still in the very, very, very preliminary stages, so don't get too excited about it yet. I'm sure Nick would be kicking me under the table if he knew I was disclosing. Oh, there's Nick on the call. Sorry, Nick. So anyway, there's a possibility that we might be pursuing some improvements along Washtenaw if we can get the band together and put in a federal grant application for it. And if we do proceed with that, that is definitely something we will come back and report to this commission on.
Well, maybe I'll follow up with you then on that, since it sounds like we have sort of an idea. So, okay, thanks.
Any other questions on this?
All right. Well, you've got the next agenda item as well. So next, Cynthia Redinger is going to share an update about quick build projects. And this is exciting because the budget that just passed is going to fund some quick build projects.
Yeah, Caleb, would you like me to share that presentation?
Yes. Yep. You should have the ability to screen share with the green button in the center bottom.
All right. Let me get that queued up for everyone. And just so that everyone knows, we had decided to do this before. Actually, Kayla, I'm sorry, but I don't have those settings yet. So you want to move me over? I don't think it's not. No, it's going. Sorry, it was operator error. That was my bad. All righty. So, and unless someone tells me it's not working, I'll assume that it is. So this evening, we wanted to give a little bit of an update on where we are at with quick build projects. And as part of that update, I just wanted to look back briefly. I know we have some new Transportation Commission members, and I want to make sure everyone had an opportunity to see this information that was presented by Sam Schwartz to the commission. And this was part of our A2 moving together process. So this is information about the quick build program as one of our key strategies for improving safety in the city. And the four areas that we have pictured here are looking at quick build curb extensions, protected bike lanes, pedestrian refuge islands, and bicycle intersection improvements. And there's a list of examples here. We also have examples, you know, the curb extensions, ped refuge islands, and those bike lanes and those improvements, but also mini traffic circles. And those are more like neighborhood traffic circles. It's not necessarily a roundabout, but you know, just more of a traffic calming device. Diverters, hardened center lines, and slow turn wedges were all examples that were given in the plan. So I wanted to take a step back and acknowledge something that we've been doing for a while, and that's our pedestrian gateway treatments, partially because a little bit of education on what exactly a pedestrian gateway treatment is never hurts. The other thing is I wanted to really acknowledge this program and project is really being our first step towards doing more quick build style projects in the city. The first time that we installed something in the street in a temporary basis was these pedestrian gateway treatments, and it was part of a research project that the Michigan Department of Transportation was doing. They reached out to us and asked us to participate in it, which was great because we were able to implement this new device and learn how effective or not it was. And we found that they were extremely effective at both reducing speed at crosswalks and stop compliance rates. So this was really our first step. One of the next things that we did was to use this type of material to address concerns that we already had. So this is an image of Ashley Street as it approaches Huron Street. And when the street was restriped to include this bike lane and this buffer, we had a lot of non-compliance at this location. So on this approach, we had a lot of people who were continuing to move right and make that right turn from the bike lane. And full disclosure, these elements were leftovers from the work that we did with MDOT. And since they had provided the materials and didn't want the extras, we decided, well, we've got them, let's use them. And it was also found to be a really effective thing. So then the next step for us was looking at Fifth Avenue and Beats. And this location, I think, is one of our first true, paint post quick build type projects. What we were looking at this location is the concern of turning speed, pedestrians not being seen, pedestrians not being yielded to, and just the width of the crossing. So a lot of concerns here. And something that we started thinking about was it would be nice to do more of like a truck apron style treatment here. However, that would need to be, we had some things that we needed to go through. We needed to be able to get that, programmed. It was one of those things where, maybe we're not going to be able to do it right away. But what we decided is let's try it with paint and post and see how that works. So as a quick build project, it's been installed for a couple of years now. And we've received very positive feedback from it, and our observations have shown that we have slower speeds at this location. And one of our next big steps as a city was downtown development project, the William Street Bikeway, which was a huge and transformative project for our city. It's really important to acknowledge it because most of what was accomplished here was really accomplished with paint and post. We do have some locations where we have concrete islands to protect those ends of that two-way protected bikeway. But in some other areas, we have more temporary items such as the planters. And we've learned a lot from this location. This particular picture is while the bikeway was still under construction, so not everything is completed in it. But it's been a good learning point for the community. Some of the things that we've done in collaboration with this project includes adjusting where things are located, installing more of the bollards to get a little bit better compliance. And also the DDA has worked with us to try out some hardened center lines and hardened lane lines as well as part of this project. But I don't have any picture of those, I apologize. The next thing that I wanted to acknowledge is last year's program. It's important to acknowledge it because we really learned a lot from this program in that the community in general does not favor using construction style devices to do a quick build project. So I think that was a really important takeaway from this project, is that there was a lot of confusion involved with that. So that as we are moving forward with other types of quick build projects, we do need to look at different types of materials. Another project that just got installed this spring, early spring, is Pontiac Trail at Barton. And this location, we had a lot of public engagement as part of the Northside STEAM Safe Routes to School process. We had a lot of engagement on this location also during the Pontiac Trail, or sorry, the Barton Drive water main and resurfacing project. So we did hear a lot from the community that there were concerns about this eastbound right turn, and that people who were waiting at the signal to cross as pedestrians didn't feel safe. We had some knockdowns of the equipment and some damage on the corner, and we were looking at something that would allow us to provide some protection for that corner, especially the pedestrians on that corner, without being a permanent change until we decide what we wanted to do as a permanent change, particularly associated with the area planning study that's going on right now. And this picture is from the day it was installed, so they still look bright and shiny and new. But I was out there last weekend as well, and I can say that I am quite impressed with how shiny and new they still look. And I would have expected a strike or two by now, but they are performing really well and don't seem to have been run over hardly made at all. It didn't look like to me. So that's kind of a fun side note. Pavement markings that have not been completed out here. We're going to be putting in some green pavement markings to highlight the bicycle crossing and the short section of two-way cycle track that we have here. And all of this work was done to enhance the crossing with the new connection under the railroad. So this is a really good example of using the space that we already have to do things that we can't do yet. So as you'll see on the leftmost picture here, we have both a edge of lane, edge of road bump out that we have installed with paint and posts, and we have a center, I'm going to call it a refuge island. It's a refuge island area, but it is located to the west of the crosswalk, so it doesn't encompass the crosswalk, but it is giving weight to the crossing and giving a little bit of shelter if it's needed. The section of two-way cycle track that is shown in the rightmost location is providing access. While it's providing access southbound on 5th, it's also providing access to the trail across Wheeler Park and to connect to the Broadway Bridge via Summit. So those are some projects that we've been up to lately, kind of where we are in what we've been up to with quick build projects. As was mentioned earlier, we have some additional funding that will be opened up in the next fiscal year, and so we'll be looking at some more of those projects. But I did want to open up the floor for discussion and questions.
Hi, Cynthia. Thank you for your presentation. It's nice to see where these deployments are. And I was wondering how these treatments become permanent, and if that's a process based on use or feedback from the community as well.
It's going to depend on the location. So for some of the locations like Barton,
Cynthia, did we lose your audio? Are others still hearing Cynthia?
I was hearing.
Oh,
Yeah, I can hear her.
Maybe it's my end.
I'll talk slower so that in between you get it all. It depends. Some locations like Barton, we have to come up with what our final design is going to look like. And, we do have some planning processes that are going on there right now. And, hopefully soon we'll be able to come up with what that final plan is going to look like. For other locations like Beeks and Depot Fifth, it's a matter of planning. We have money that is set aside to improve major street crosswalks every year, and there's always more demand for those money for that money than we can actually provide in a year. So we always have a backlog of those projects, and the beauty of a quick build project is that it's not perfect, but you're not letting perfect stand in the way of good. So you can get benefit while you're waiting to be able to put in that more robust permanent solution.
And Cynthia, do you want to speak real quickly to the Blewett bump out at Clegg and how that was temporary and then it turned to permanent?
Yeah, that's an excellent example that I honestly didn't even think to include because it's already installed. It's not. So we had some requests for school safety improvements on Blewett, and we had, looking at those, it's, what can we do to improve that safety? And what we wanted to do was be able to narrow those crossings up. And we'd had some heavy resistance from that community through a traffic calming program that they had already been through, where they were very much not interested in doing bump outs. And so what we were able to do was use the quick curb, the same type of materials that you saw on Barton, to use those types of materials to create a temporary bump out. And we installed those in the fall, left them in over the winter, and to see, what kind of reaction was the community going to have. And I think we got 2 contacts on that after it got installed. And one was a very excited one, and one was questioning why we needed them. But at the end of the day, what we found out was that once they were installed, it wasn't a big deal, right? People realized that they weren't going to be as impactful as they had previously thought. And with that, we tested it for a year. We said, okay, it's going to work. It's going to work for the buses. It's working for the pedestrians that are showing up. We're not hearing any concerns from any cyclists. And then we were able to install those the next summer in concrete. Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. Just kind of a follow-up on that. I know that sometimes you hear it very loudly from the community if something doesn't feel quite right. But if it's sort of just a minor tweak sort of thing, I wonder if there's an opportunity as we sort of start doing more of these quick builds, that there might be some place that people could go on to the city's website and just provide a little bit of feedback, like this is working, but gosh, it'd be better if it was just a little different, or this is amazing. I hope it is permanent. I was thinking about it. I mean, I actually have not. I was thinking about this while I was in a car, so I was not on a bike to actually think it was practical. But as I was observing the Barton quick build project the other day, I was thinking, if I was on a bike, I bet I'd love to squeeze to the right of that and use it as a pretty narrow bike lane at that intersection and turn right. And just have a little buffer from the cars at that intersection. And it would be a substandard bike lane, but it'd be sort of like a little opening that you might have a little extra benefit. I don't know if there was a reason that in that design, for example, that's not allowed for. It's kind of closed, as you might try to use it as bike lane. Do you have some thoughts on that, about why that might not be a good idea?
As there are not bike lanes on Barton currently, part of the design for that is that we need to provide a taper for motorists to get properly aligned, and so that's why there is the taper there.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hadamaki?
Yes, I'm wondering if you can share any of the ideas that might be on the docket in the near future, given the budget amendments that have just passed. And is that docket full? Are you trying to, or are you interested in soliciting ideas from the community or this commission for other new quick build ideas?
Well, I think it's fair to say that staff is always open to ideas and recommendations. I know that Raymond has a strategy in mind, so I'm going to give him an opportunity to answer that.
Thanks, Cynthia, and thanks for the question. One of the things that I really want to make sure we do is we want to put the plan in action. Obviously, we're still waiting for approval from City Council, but that's scheduled to go before City Council on June 7th. If that does get approved, because that's data-driven, because it is really a Vision Zero plan, I really want to focus on the areas that have the highest need. So, for those of you who are familiar enough with the plan, you're familiar with kind of these tier 1, tier 2 safety corridors and safety intersections. And to me, that's, if we're going to get the most bang for our buck, if we're really going to try to achieve Vision Zero, I really want to focus on the highest need areas. That's not to say we won't solicit feedback, but so much of our work historically has been kind of scattershot and it hasn't been very well coordinated. And now I want us to be very strategic about the things we do. Again, that's not to say we're not going to listen to folks. We can still go out and solicit feedback and what type of treatment, but really I think the effectiveness really has to be at places that can achieve the most bang for the buck. And so that's our starting position. That being said, we don't have specifics drawn out yet. The budget is just freshly approved. We have just started to schedule some meetings where we're going to start going through, looking at the plan, looking at what our options are, looking what would fit where. Part of this is also looking at the crash patterns, right? So what kind of crashes are being experienced at that intersection and what sort of countermeasure is going to address that effectively. So that's kind of our strategy right now moving forward, but I appreciate Councilmember Briggs' idea of opening up a portal for people to give continuous feedback, because we do want to be responsive and try to, make adjustments as we go. And Commissioner Hadamaki, I think your suggestion too of, where are we going to be targeting? We definitely want to hear from this commission and share the information with you, what we're thinking.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add on to that, I would like to say that in general, our public has gotten very comfortable with using A2Fixit, and they are, when we make a change, if they have questions, if they have concerns, we always get good feedback through that tool.
I'm just going to build a stack for you. So I see Commissioner Lee and then Commissioner Parsons.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, my question was going to be around that. What's the best current method of eliciting or at least giving feedback to the general public? So if A2Fixit is probably the best portal at this point in time, then I think that actually answers the question I had. And the only other plug is I think delineators and paint is a very effective method of controlling at least transportation behavior. So very effective for the actual cost it takes along with the actual paint that helps actually prevent spalling and just provides an extra layer of a little bit of protection on the asphalt. So big fan of what you guys are doing. Thank you for your presentation. And it seems like the best way for public to give some feedback is A2Fixit until another portal is created. So thank you.
Yeah, and I would say that I think the majority of the customer contacts that I'm getting right now are coming in through A2Fixit. We still get a good amount of email, and I really don't get as many calls as I feel like we used to, but definitely still a lot of A2Fixit is coming in. So the nice thing about A2Fixit as well is that you can provide an image. So if you have a question about something specific, but you may not know how to describe it really well, you can take a picture of it. So that's really helpful. And who is next?
Commissioner Parsons.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for the presentation. And I have to say, I am thrilled by these developments, and I think it captures the spirit of my involvement in the commission for the last 5 years, that we should be pursuing these. So I'm thrilled by it, and the transportation plan is going to align, I think, very well. That said, there's some in our community who see this as sort of experimenting in the streets, or these are temporary treatments and they're not worthwhile pursuing. I don't hold that view at all. But you know, we've been talking about public relations some and public impact. I would like to see a little bit more education or outreach, just defining that these are current best practices within experts within the industry, and you know, sort of put those arguments to rest, or at least to explain and you know, allow for people to be okay not feeling terribly comfortable, but trusting the process and knowing that things are safe and moving forward. So that's my only addition, and to be honest, it's sort of an aside to what I see are some of the most impactful things that we can be doing for our community right now. And I'm thrilled to see that we have some budget to support it, and that staff are working towards it. And I really look forward to future conversations and seeing where this goes. So thank you all.
Can you give us a preview about any upcoming quick builds?
Well, I imagine there will be bump outs in the future.
Okay. I was thinking more.
We don't have any particular projects planned right now. We will have funds available in the next fiscal year. I know that we, as a team, are going to be working on prioritizing those as quickly. I would say that I think that from a buildability and an ability to decide, hey, let's go ahead and do this quickly, that you know, looking at more instances of using these types of devices to do bump outs as is laid out in the plan does make sense. It is a high return on investment type of decision.
Great. Thanks so much. Oh, Raymond, did you want to?
Well, I just wanted to add real quickly that there is a surprising amount of behind-the-scenes work that needs to go into even a very quick build. In particular, the operations and maintenance, especially for things like street sweeping, snow plowing, waste removal, things like that. It requires a lot more thought than I had originally maybe appreciated. So that's probably one of our first chores, is really making sure, you know, the locations that we pick, you know, how does it work with all the different users in that corridor? Obviously, we want to achieve the safety goals that I mentioned before, but we also want to make sure that, you know, we're not trading off one thing for, you know, a negative effect. And so, so internally, we need to make sure that, like, Public Works and street sweeping kind of understands what we're up to, and you know, that the operations, when they street sweep or whatever, can kind of work around these devices. And those are some of the early conversations that I suspect we'll have to have. And then that will start to germinate some ideas, and then we'll go from there.
Cool. Thank you. Any last questions? All right. Well, thanks so much, Cynthia. This was a really great presentation. Really cool to see some of the stuff that has been going in, and the ways that we've been trying stuff out. I'm really excited about it. So thanks.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure to be here.
All right. So next up, we are going to consider action on the proposed personal mobility ordinance that has been prepared by the Micromobility Committee. So as you all may recall, the Micromobility Committee has existed and has been working on some changes to the personal mobility ordinance, which used to just be the bikes ordinance, since I've been on the commission. So it was my very first meeting. We heard about scooters. And so we brought this back recently, but then it turned out that there were still some edits we wanted to make. All those edits have now been made. I hope folks have had a chance to take a look at the ordinance, but we do have some time for any questions and discussion before we move into a motion to send this on to council? So any comments, questions, concerns? Commissioner Hadamaki.
Hi, yeah, I have two questions. The definition up at the top of a personal mobility vehicle, it says, or by the power of a person riding in combination with electric motor. So does that mean it has to be in combination? You know, for example, okay, it's like a scooter where you don't have to like push off, you know.
Right. It was we spent a lot of time narrowing, like figuring out this definition and like creating something that wasn't gonna like accidentally ban e-bikes, that could sort of encompass the kinds of micromobility devices that we might see down the line that don't exist yet necessarily, so that would be flexible. But yeah, the idea there, so like scooters, e-bikes, even if they're like, if there's a throttle involved, so that it's not necessarily like human, there's not always human power, like that's okay. That was the goal.
Okay, because I read it as,
Thank you, Kayla.
yeah, okay. I read it as, you know, if a human isn't in combination, and so an electric motor is providing all of the motive force, is that not okay? But
Right. Well, so like a Vespa style scooter that's, you know, electric, but it's a motor scooter. That would not be encompassed by this. That was the goal.
okay.
Well,
I think spin scooters, like you kind of have to push off,
You
but then
do.
it's
You have
on
to-
its own. So
Oh yeah. There's enough, you have to kick to start, and the motor won't start if you don't like get a good kick start. So this is how we got here.
okay.
Oh.
And then, sorry.
Go ahead, Jim, you wanted to explain a little more?
Tim, you're talking to?
Oh, sorry. I thought I saw Jim unmuting, but Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that it does say that any vehicle intended to carry no more than two persons abreast, that is not a motor vehicle or trailer required to be licensed or registered by the state of Michigan, which
Right.
I think that clearly excludes like motor scooters or motorcycles that actually are like, yeah, that have to be registered with the state and
Right.
everything.
Correct.
Okay. And then I had one more question about
Okay, go
something
ahead.
further down, if that's okay.
Yep.
It's was section 11, or sorry, it looks like it was 10, now it's 11 down on the next to last page, I think. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. I think, yeah, a person operating, yeah. So what is meant by not carry an article that impairs or prevents? I just, think of myself as like, riding my bike, I have one hand on and then the other hand like holding a cup of coffee or something like that. I mean, there's some level of impairment to controlling the bicycle, but I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that.
I think this carried over from the prior version of the ordinance where it was just talking about bicycles. But I think the idea here would be anything like bulky enough to impede vision, or my recollection is this is carried over from the old ordinance, and so I'm not sure exactly what this would be. I mean, I think there's probably all kinds of things a person can carry without impeding their control. But even something like on a spin scooter, for example, you really need to have both hands on the handlebars. And so I like there could be issues, but I don't know how enforceable this is necessarily. But it was in there and we kept it. That's what I've got.
Yeah, it's a high level of nitpicking. I just, the word impair, like, I mean, anything, impair is a large scale. So, I mean, if it prevents control, that's pretty clear, but impairing could be just a small impairment or not a big deal.
Yeah, okay. I think I saw Councilmember Briggs. I'm sort of scanning back and forth to see hands. Oh, I see lots of hands. I'm going to build a stack. Briggs, Valderrama, and then Felt.
Yeah, thank you. So just since I'm going to have to explain this when it gets to council, if it does, I guess, but assuming it gets there, just can you tell me a little bit more about, kind of, obviously this is trying to bring our maybe ordinances up to date in terms of including other types of mobility devices, but what problems were we seeing that we're trying to solve with this?
So the big problem is that electric scooters, based on the definitions that we have, end up in this gray zone where they're not really allowed anywhere, or maybe they're allowed everywhere. But so the goal was to make it clear that any spaces that are okay for bikes to be are also okay for things like e-scooters. The e-scooters were definitely the impetus, but the goal with this was to be even more flexible than that, with the understanding that there's a bit of a boom happening right now in these kinds of micromobility devices and programs, and to just create a system that would be more accommodating and have more clarity about where these kinds of vehicles are allowed to be.
So obviously this sort of suggests that folks should operate them in a responsible manner. Downtown is an example of a place where we say, please walk your bike on the sidewalk, but we don't require it. Is there an expectation that we might want to change our signage in the DDA area to provide greater guidance to other types of micromobility in general?
We talked a lot about that and about what kinds of signage, and that I think that might be a reasonable thing for the DDA to take up, is whether it might be appropriate to shift the language on their signs downtown. We were trying to, because there's a lot of historically a lot of objections to trying to ban bikes from sidewalks anywhere in town. We didn't feel like that was an avenue that would make sense for these revisions, that we should try to keep the basic where bikes are permitted or not permitted. We were going to just sort of open that up to more kinds of vehicles, or more, non-motorized vehicles. So those bigger questions about should bikes be allowed on the sidewalks downtown, I think are, we treated those as slightly outside the scope of this work, because as it was explained to me, they were more fraught. Those conversations were more fraught and could be handled in a different way.
Thanks.
And if I could just add one thing to Commissioner Kleinman's statement, which is a perfect answer. We have worked with SPIN to regulate the speed for e-scooters downtown. So I think they're regulated at 10 miles per hour or below downtown, whereas they're capable of 15 miles. We have ability to do that. So if, this commission or others feel like we can, tweak it further. For example, if you've ever tried to ride one across the diag, it will kind of shut down on you. That is also a geo-fenced area where the university has requested that there not be e-scooter operations. So there is some latitude. Now, granted, that doesn't affect private e-scooters, but it does affect, SPIN that we could work with. So there's some opportunities there for us as well that don't necessarily need to be codified, but we can do it as part of the operations and maintenance of those scooters.
I had no idea. Thanks.
Commissioner Balarama.
So I was looking at section 10, where it's the city may sell or otherwise dispose of, and it talks about for a vehicle that remains unrecovered for more than 1 month after its impoundment. I'm concerned about somebody who relies on an electric vehicle and who might not have the means to come up with it like in a month. And I'm thinking about like low-income communities. And so I was wondering if it's possible to make that a little longer, or why it needs to be 1 month. Is it a matter of like storing the actual unit?
I don't remember digging into that piece at all. So I don't know if any staff have some information to share about that. Personally, I'm definitely open to extending that length of time, but there may be other considerations.
To my knowledge, there's no special time frame. I think it's just ultimately we ran into a situation with one of the electric scooter companies that shall remain nameless, and we ended up impounding a lot of their scooters and had them for actually almost 2 years. and it was taking up a lot of space. They were actually just auctioned last week, interestingly enough. So I think that's all we're trying to do, is not allow for these things to, I don't think we're even really thinking targeting individuals, but it's more about like companies that aren't being good corporate citizens and having a big stockpile of their stuff and they're not coming to get it. So that was the intent here. But I think your point is valid too. And if there's a longer duration of time that would make you feel more comfortable, I don't see a reason why staff wouldn't be able to support that.
Think like right off the top of my head, like maybe 4 to 6 months to give people alternative like sources of like funding if they do need to find their scooter, just from like the lens of like a low income community member versus like maybe not the corporation that you like mentioned.
I can also imagine a situation with a student who is gone for several months and comes back to find their bike or scooter impounded, that we'd want to give them more time to get it back. I've been that student. So I do like that idea a lot, and it'd be great if we could extend that time before we move it forward. Thanks. Commissioner Felt.
Yeah, I was impressed when I read this over at how comprehensive it was. I thought everything was included. And then I thought, wait a second, was it actually the intent to exclude the delivery pods that are around? Now, most of them do come with either an e-scooter or a skateboarder or a bicyclist behind them. But they fall into yet another category, or what? Where do they end up?
Yeah, so I'll take first stab at this. I actually spoke to John Reiser, someone from our legal department today, about this very issue. This definition that you have before you about the personal mobility devices specifically has a human attached to it, right? We kind of talked about that earlier. I do think the autonomous delivery robots or ground drones or whatever terminology you want to use for them would probably have to be regulated through some sort of separate thing, whether it has to be codified, whether it needs to be like a use agreement. I think we're still figuring that out. We know of at least 3 companies that are operating in Ann Arbor, so we think that this is something that we will have to address sooner rather than later. And we have some ongoing discussions with the legal department in terms of what the best avenue might be for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments or concerns?
And I just want to note, we do have a public caller with the last 3 digits of 556. So maybe if it's all right with you, Chair Kleinman, while we're waiting for commissioners to see if there's any final questions, yes, and I see that they have just raised their hand. So Commissioner 556, assuming I think I got the nod from Chair Kleinman, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to speak. So you will press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, my name's Ralph McKee. I actually wanted to speak about the Healthy Streets update, if you're there. Otherwise, I'll wait.
We're not quite there yet. So perhaps if it's all right, we'll come back to you then shortly. I think that's our next agenda item.
That's
okay.
fine. It sounded to me like you're wrapping this up. So.
Yes. We just wanted to make sure it wasn't relevant for this. All right. Thank you then.
Great, thanks. So I think we're ready to take a vote. So my motion is going to be the Transportation Commission recommends City Council approve the personal mobility ordinance as edited in our discussion. So with a longer period of impoundment.
With 6 months instead of 1 month.
Okay, great. So the Transportation Commission recommends City Council approve the personal mobility ordinance with the edit of extending the impoundment to 6 months. Can I get a motion? I'm seeing lots of hands. I'm going to take move by Mackey, seconded by Boland. All those in favor, please physically raise your hand. All those opposed and any abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, everyone. I'm so excited that we're one step closer to having this in place. So next up, Raymond Hess is going to share an update about Healthy Streets. I think it probably makes sense to hear the update and maybe then the public comment and then commissioner discussion after that. So that's how I'm going to stack this up. So take it away, Commissioner Hess.
All right, very good. Thank you. So we've been on a little bit of a roller coaster with Healthy Streets. So you may recall that we presented this to this commission last month in April at your joint session. You recommended approval to carry that forward. We took it to City Council at their first meeting in May. You may recall that the action before them was twofold. It was to award the contract to the contractor for implementation, but then also it required a budget amendment. Since this was not in the budget, it required 8 votes anytime there's a budget amendment. So the motion, a budget amendment requires 8 votes, and the Healthy Streets failed at May 3rd by a 7-4 vote. So it did not meet the 8-vote threshold. So we thought Healthy Streets was over, but then on Monday night there was a budget amendment that was sponsored by Councilmember Briggs and I believe Mayor Taylor to amend the 22 budget, fiscal year 22, which starts July 1st, to put Healthy Streets back in its entirety, and that did pass. Budget amendments at this stage in the process only require 6 votes. And it passed this time, 7-4. So Healthy Streets is back on. What that means in implementation timeframe is we can't start until July 1st, but we are trying to line up all the different pieces so that we can hit the ground running. I just entered into our Legistar, which does packets, a resolution to award the contract back to PK for the June 21st City Council meeting. So again, this would award the contract, and then come July 1st, when the budget takes effect, they can begin work on it. I will note that there is going to be some coordination that's required. You may recall that some of the work on Packard is going to be coordinated with the resurfacing project, because the bike lane on Packard between Hill and State is going to be resurfaced, and then those pedestrian refuge islands on East Packard, which there are 2, need to be shaved down a little bit in order to make way for the new lane configurations. So don't expect those to kind of happen immediately. I wouldn't be surprised if the neighborhood slow streets kind of roll out first, because that's deployment of signs, and some of those other coordination things may take a little bit longer because there's a little bit more complicated implementation that goes along with those. So Healthy Streets is back. I'll probably reform the group that we dissolved just over a week ago. And I think, this commission still has a standing group, and we'll gladly, engage with them so that we can, continue to make refinements and make modifications where necessary, but also monitor it. There is data collection that is part of this as well. We are collecting traffic counts and bike ped counts before implementation, so that'll happen in the coming weeks. And then there is a post-deployment data collection effort as well. Again, looking at traffic counts, bike ped counts as well, just to see what's happening. That will probably happen late in the fall when those are conducted. So those are some of the pieces we're lining up. We're excited to get started on it, and thanks City Council for the passage of that budget amendment that made it possible.
Great, thanks. Sorry, hold on one sec. All right, thank you. I will be braiding while we talk, but I think now is the time. That was everything? Is that right? Okay, for a presentation. So we're gonna take our public comment from Mr. McKee, and then we will have questions and comments from the commissioners. All right, thanks.
Hi, this is Ralph McKee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes, we can.
I'm happy that you allowed me the opportunity to speak. I had written council about this a couple of times and spoke, I think, once or twice about it too. I heard a lot of discussion earlier on sort of related topics about public engagement and public feedback and how to best collect that and so on. I have a real concern about that on this topic, so I'll start with that. I think that the data or the survey data here was misrepresented. And I think that's a very serious issue that needs to be taken seriously. When I was preparing to speak to council and analyzing the data, I started with the giant chart that was provided that had all the comments that were made on the survey. I thought the survey was biased to begin with, but that's another story. That when I counted the things, I couldn't get to the numbers that staff had provided. And when I heard Mr. Hess talking about it Monday night, I finally realized, or I think I'm correct on this, what had happened. There were 400 and change comments that were for. There were 400 roughly comments against. And I had many more comments against than he did. And it looks to me like, I'm pretty sure this is right, that 111 comments were labeled other. Those were overwhelmingly negative. They weren't counted. Not only were they not counted, they weren't looked at. And many of those comments were very, very thoughtful and detailed, sometimes almost a page. But those apparently were not addressed. That to me is a pretty major failure and needs to be addressed. Number two, in terms of the application of the data that was there, that doesn't appear to be done in a way that I would expect either. For example, Jewett was 22-4 against. That's just one example. There are several others. I can send you all the email I sent to council. I don't understand how you go forward with a program that includes something that has overwhelming opposition. I read Council Member Nelson's blog. She says that Mr. Hess told her that he was waiting comments that were from the individual streets, way heavier than comments from others. And then I heard at the meeting and in my discussions with Councilmember Briggs that the concept is neighborhood friendly. That isn't neighborhood friendly. That's my street friendly. That means I view that as not progressive. It's elitist. You're taking a single street
30
and
seconds
closing
remaining.
it down based on those individual people rather than the actual neighborhood or the entire city. Compare that to development where a couple of people on a street would never be able to control their street for purposes of development. Yet that's exactly what you're doing here. And you're doing it ignoring the data completely. And that's just unacceptable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those comments. All right, so Commissioner questions and comments. I see Commissioner Hatamaki.
Yes, I wonder if it's possible to move up. I know part of the plan is to post signs at each neighborhood slow street and possibly the major street installations. Is it possible to get those signs out there before the July 1st fiscal, the start of the fiscal year? Is it possible to do everything that we possibly can so that when the fiscal year starts and the money becomes available, the actual work from the contractor can begin rather than waiting till the fiscal year? Then you got to put out signs, wait 2 weeks for the signs and so forth. Just in the interest of, well, maybe I should phrase it in the interest of getting more data for the program to get it started earlier.
Yeah, so the signs can be ordered. We actually need to order more signs, truth be told. So that's going to be one of our first tasks. Actually, I already asked staff to look into that. So we need to order and get the signs printed, and then we'll have to deploy them. I would want to make sure that we coordinate the deployment of those advanced warning signs somewhat in close proximity to when the contractor will be out putting up, especially the neighborhood slow streets. I wouldn't want months to transpire, right? If we put them out too early, then it may have a little bit of a negative effect. So, to the point you mentioned, 1 to 2 weeks beforehand, I think is probably what we'd be targeting for deployment of those. And then once we get a schedule from the contractor, we can coordinate that. But we can order the signs and start kind of lining up the different pieces in advance now.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. I guess in relation to the public comment that we heard, I thought Mr. Hess might want to speak a little bit more to concerns around the data analysis. I mean, I think I know that it was not that in the subcommittee, it was clear that those other comments had been looked at, and I just thought you might want to speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So yeah, a couple things to note. One of the things, we did try to make the survey a little bit more inclusive. So if you remember last year, the survey was purely a suggestion tool. You would drop a pin and kind of suggest how you would want the street used as a healthy street. This year, you know, and the accusation last year was, well, that was a little too leading, right? That, you know, you didn't really allow people to provide opposition to a healthy street deployment. And so this year we did change the way the tool worked. We allowed for people to self-identify as being in support of, in opposition to, or this other comment as well. And so that was the intent of what we're doing. You know, I'm not going to claim we got it 100% right, but we were trying to kind of, you know, listen to some of the feedback from last year and make modifications this year, and that's what that was meant to do. In terms of a lesson I learned when I first came to the city is I do not interpret comments and assign them to a category. So that was a lesson I learned early, where we were reading through comments, and sometimes comments are hard to determine if people are for something or against something. So for the other comment, like column, we did not try to tease out if it was a person in for or against. Now, sometimes it's very apparent, but sometimes it isn't. And so that's why we just provided all the raw data the way it is. We did look at all the comments, and a couple things I'll note is a lot of the comments in opposition, not all of them, but many were about last year's deployments and were complaints about some of the things that we think we have rectified with this year's deployment. So a lot of comments about, take East Packard, for example. There's a lot of opposition to taking that outside lane and narrowing that profile down to one lane in each direction with the center turn lane. We were responsive to that. We're still keeping the 5-lane vehicular profile, 2 lanes in each direction with a center turn lane. We were just narrowing the street. So a lot of the comments that you had about don't do this on East Packard, really it's a completely different deployment, and we're not taking away vehicular travel lane. And then the other thing I wanted to mention too is the caller's correct in that we do give a larger deference to people who live along the street. And this was direction that we received from city council members last year that said that people who live along that street, who experience that street, have kind of the best appreciation for what should or shouldn't happen on that street. And this is not inconsistent with what we do with other programs. This is exactly how we run our residential parking permit program, right? It's petition driven by people who live on the street. This is very similar to how we run traffic calming, right? These are people who live along the street, they petition for traffic calming. So it's not inconsistent with how we run other programs. And when we looked at the data for those who opposed, you know, Jewett or Sunset or some of those, we found that the people in opposition to were not actually living on the street, but were probably commuting and passing through on that street. And so not to say we didn't read those and didn't take those into consideration, but there were comments in favor of those deployments either last year or this year on those streets. And those comments in favor came from people living along those streets. And so that's why we kind of moved those forward the way we did, because it was trying to be responsive to the people who live along the street.
And then just a follow-up piece around that. Thank you so much for that additional information. A piece that might help with kind of communications around this. I was thinking it might be possible to update the city's website to talk a little bit more about kind of what is a soft closure, how should that be used, what's appropriate, because I think a lot of folks some people may be confused that, you know, they see the barricade and they think that they're almost relating it to construction or something like that, that they can't for any reason go past that, and just kind of what's an appropriate use of what does a soft closure mean, I think might be helpful information to have up there and for folks like me to be able to share.
Great suggestion. And I will make another note here too, based on the recommendation of this committee, we will be releasing some educational videos about healthy streets prior to deployment. So now that we know it's back on, we had a script already developed. We were close to working with CTN, then we put it on hold. Now we need to kind of reamp that because, again, I think, one of the problems that we experienced last year was kind of a communication problem where people didn't understand, and we're trying to get out in front of that a little bit better this year.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner Summers.
Okay, this is for Raymond. Again, I'm an engineer by trade, and I don't quite understand why there's so much leverage from public input. We have, we obviously have professionals that are capable of, analyzing data and understanding what is required in transportation networks. And there are examples from all over the globe about what works and what doesn't. I don't understand why, other than political reasons, why local input from uninformed individuals really take any weight, other than political reasons. I mean,
Well,
the engineers and scientists should be able to figure this out. And it doesn't matter if someone calls us elitist or whatever. What works. And there are examples from all over the globe that will cut through this.
Yeah, and Kayla can probably help me out a little bit here, but public engagement is a very important component of the work we do on pretty much any project. And we do try to solicit input from the community. Even if you look at the changes we made from last year's deployment to this year's deployment, we try to be as responsive as we could to a lot of the concerns we heard last year. I'm not claiming we can make everybody happy all the time. And I'm also not claiming that we will go against engineering judgment. If something is unsafe, we're not going to turn a blind eye towards it, nor are we going to advance something that's unsafe. So there is kind of the engineering judgment and best practice that we, strive for and look to implement. But at the same time, we want to come with ears open and listen to the community as well, to make sure that we are doing things in concert with the community and not, to them. We want to do things with them. So public engagement is just, a kind of core part of almost all the work we do. Sometimes we do it well, sometimes we don't, but it's just kind of the Ann Arbor way.
I could just to echo what Raymond has said, and to highlight that there are decisions that are made that are based on the crash data analysis, and if it's a safety-driven decision. Cynthia, when she spoke, Cynthia Redinger earlier talked about bump out and blew it, and if I remember that process correctly, we went through the traffic calming public engagement process. There wasn't community support for installation, but it was determined that there's a safety need for a change on that street, and it was made anyway, and it was sort of looked at by staff that in the future, that really shouldn't have even been taken to a community discussion. It was a safety need. And so I think that where there's the data that supports making those changes for well-documented, justifiable reasons, we do move forward. But as Raymond said, if there are decisions being made that leave room for community discussion, that we are not able to reach a foregone conclusion from the data that we have, then it helps us to hear from those who maybe live on the area, use that space, and may have firsthand input that we're not aware of, if we are not out in the community in that way. So I appreciate, Commissioner Summers, your feedback and your support to let's make data-driven, scientific-based decisions. I think that that's really critical and important, and I think that Raymond is correct that we do have some commitment and responsibility to incorporate public input in our decisions as well.
And I get that. I totally get that. But coming from a machinery safety area, we would create machinery, operations that everyone hated. they couldn't operate the machine as easily as they could before, but guess what? It saved people's lives, period. And that's really the only thing I'm interested in. And someone who bikes 97% of the time in the area, I'm more interested in, the actual engineering capability and not what someone opinion who doesn't have an engineering background. And you can call it elitist if you would like, but we just really need to cut through the politics and just get done what needs to be done for everyone's safety. That's my opinion on all of this.
Thanks. I'm going to keep us moving. Councilmember Briggs and then Commissioner Felt.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, I completely agree with the previous, with Mr. Hess and Ms. Coleman in terms of kind of talking about our process. And I just, to add to that, I think we are, we want to make sure that we're not leaning too heavily in one direction. I think, we're going to be looking at, okay, what's the science say? What's our local what do our local engineers say? What do national best practice or international best practices say? What's our local input? And I think when it becomes dangerous is if we maybe rely too heavily on obviously we want to make sure things are safe. The engineering piece of this is critical. But if we weigh one of those factors, way too much. I mean, I have certainly been on the advocacy side of things where I've been pushing our engineers to say, hey, we see this someplace else. Why don't we do it here? And so sometimes public input can be about trying to encourage communities to do different things too. So I think it comes in all different formats. It's not always an attempt to stop progress necessarily, but I do think it weighs in. And there's often things that people at the local level know a little bit more, like, you put a crosswalk in a certain spot and people locally can say, but that's really not where people are crossing. It really should be a half a block down. And sometimes that public input can really help to make a project better.
Thanks. Commissioner Felt.
Yeah, I'll try to be really succinct on this, but I think it's social engineering is partly what we're talking about. That yes, there is politics involved at times, but you get greater compliance if people feel like they were involved in part of solving the solution. And it also is not the single goal to just get the project done, but also to build community, build relationships, make people feel good about their streets. All kinds of other things are also lined up there. So I think that they have to all be included. And as the safety issue goes up, that becomes more and more weighted. But we are also about building community and about those interesting ideas that come out of the ether and out of the coming together of more than one brain. And I know a lot of engineers and I love many of them dearly, but it's also a different way of thinking. And we need the balance. That's it.
Thanks. All right, we're going to go to Commissioner Parsons and then I'm going to try and wrap us up and move us along.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I wouldn't even speak on this if it wasn't a passion of mine as a cultural analyst. Roadways are cultural spaces, not engineering spaces, and humans interact in them, and we can't control their behavior just on numbers and best outcomes. That said, what I do want to point out is that, at least for Packard, the trajectory that this took is that we used a scientific method. We tried something out. We had a hypothesis. Did it work or did it not? Again, scientifically, maybe. Human-wise, I don't know. But we made improvements. And then we suddenly discovered that, hey, there's this new plan that we can accommodate all users. We can lower speeds. We can have bike lanes. So in my estimation, this worked incredibly so, and I look forward to this deployment, and I encourage these sorts of deployments. That engineering folks don't have the exact answers because humans are weird, and we have to figure out how it works, and we have to, play with it a little bit because that's the scientific method. It's not experimentation, it's the scientific method. So I encourage these sort of deployments. I understand where Commissioner Summers is coming from, that sometimes we might give deference to folks who speak the loudest, but the reality is that we're progressing forward based on true practices in various fields, and I really support it, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. So thanks everyone on this one. I wanted to especially thank Commissioner Hess and your whole team for all the work you've done on Healthy Streets, and Councilmember Briggs for bringing this amendment back to council and getting this moved through. I know it was a heavy lift, and I'm really excited to see Healthy Streets coming back this year. So now, related to Healthy Streets, since the Healthy Streets Committee still exists, we have a member of the public who's been participating in our meetings and who we would like to be appointed as an official community member representative of the committee. So you had her statement in your packet. So this is Rachel Francisco. And so if there's any, we can have some discussion about this first if needed, but I also think we could probably just move straight ahead with a motion to appoint Rachel Francisco as a community member representative on the Healthy Streets Committee. All right, so that's Commissioner Boland moves the motion, and Commissioner Parsons seconds. So we can just take a vote. All those in favor of the motion, physically raise your hand. All those opposed, and any abstentions? All right, motion passes unanimously, and we will let Rachel know that she's officially on the committee. We've got another meeting coming up. So that'll be great. She's been a great asset to the committee so far. Moving forward, we're now going to consider an action related to the Michigan Drive Safe Bills package. You all had some information in the packet about this. I can explain briefly. I'm the one who brought this to the agenda. The timing is really fortuitous. This week is actually a week of action for the Drive Michigan Forward campaign. And they've been working for several years to get Michigan to restore driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. This package of bills actually does more than that. It sort of streamlines the whole state ID process. So it's not just about driver's licenses. And it streamlines the process for all immigrants in Michigan, not just undocumented immigrants. I view this as an important transportation related issue because I think sort of fundamentally what we're concerned with on the commission is sort of freedom of movement for everyone who lives and works in Ann Arbor and the ability to move freely and safely around here. And so to me, this feels under the purview of the Transportation Commission. And what I would love for us to do is basically put forward a motion to recommend that City Council put forward a resolution in favor of these bills. Similar, City Council does this sometimes with with bills that the state is considering. The most recent one was about gun control. This one felt relevant to transportation, and so I wanted to bring it to the commission and then encourage it to go to council. But I'm happy to open up the floor for some questions and discussion before we move this forward, because I know it's a little bit outside of our usual stuff. So Commissioner Feltz.
I just wondered if this would have any impact on the Washtenaw County ID program.
I'm muted. I'm not sure what impact it would have on the county ID program. My guess is the county ID program would continue to exist, but that state IDs would become an option, which there are certain kinds of things where a state ID is what's required in order to do certain things.
Right.
I don't think they would preclude each other. Do you have other? No, okay. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Parsons.
I just want to say that I fully support the resolved clauses. I absolutely think we should support these two bills. So my concern is, I guess, maybe in the resolved clauses. And then again, I just want to say I don't want to be a wordsmith. I don't want to ultimately the end goal. I want to see these two bills passed. I think that there's a heightened emphasis on driver licenses and less emphasis on state IDs. And state IDs do play a major impact in how modern transportation services work. Particularly, a state ID means that you can get a checking count and start using micromobility or bike share or all sorts of other things. So I just want to, I don't know how much we want to tweak the language necessarily, but I do want to recognize that both of these avenues to official identification impact transportation ways. And I think that we should highlight those. And we could talk maybe a little bit more about how to do that. There's some other wordsmithing things that I sort of have, but then again, I want to hear from others and sort of hear their thoughts. Again, though, I super appreciate the support for this. I'm enthused by the state pursuing it, and I think it's a net win.
Great, thanks. And I would be comfortable with adding state IDs wherever we mention licenses. If it I think that would be an easy edit to just loop in the state IDs as well. I know as I was bringing this forward, I was super laser focused on driver's licenses just because that's been the focus of this Drive Michigan Forward campaign. So I see Councilmember Briggs and then back to Commissioner Felt.
Thanks. So I would be a lot more comfortable with this moving to council without the first whereas clause because it says most people who live or work in Ann Arbor do have to use cars at least some of the time. I think we've worked really hard as a community to make that a choice, and we're working that, and I think it would still hold pretty well as a resolution without that first whereas clause. I defer to others on that. So from a pro-immigrant sort of perspective, I think these bills are great. There is a piece to this though that makes me, there's a piece of the legislation that makes me a little bit concerned. And you may have more answers because you've been looking at this more than I do. It's not only about allowing folks that are undocumented to be able to get driver's licenses or state IDs. It also says those folks without documentation can get driver's licenses. And so from sort of a, so my concern about that is that, we work to make sure that driving is something that people, when we see somebody's driver's license, we know that they are who they say they are because they have provided documentation. So it's been spun sort of, maybe spun's not quite the right word, but it's been presented as, this could help folks who are elderly, who don't have documentation. To me, it's maybe if somebody has no documentation about who they are, I'm a little concerned about giving them a state ID or a driver's license that says that they are somebody in particular. And also I have, maybe this isn't overly worried, but somebody who might have lost their driver's license, lost their privileges to a driver's license, it feels like they might be able to just walk into a Secretary of State and take a test and say they're somebody else now. So those are my non-immigration sort of questions. I don't know if you have answers to any of those.
I have answers to one of them, which is about the broader question of who has documents. So I think there's a fair number of people who don't have a birth certificate anymore. Like the kinds of proof that they need, like those kinds of official documents. And this is especially true for lower income people who've had to move a lot of times, people who end up in the foster system. There are a lot of reasons that people end up without documents that should not preclude them from getting a license. And I think those are actually much more common than the sort of bad actor situation that you're describing, which my sense is that the bills do have sort of protections in place so that it's not going to be like, no one can just walk in and say like, I'm Joe, I want a driver's license that says I'm Joe. My sense is that that's not how this is going to work, but that it really is about improving access to IDs and licenses for a broader swath of the community who might not have the documents, the official documents that they would need. I have a member of my family who did not have documents until her 70s. And so that, like, that's the kind of thing that I think about, to think that that's for.
Yeah, I understand that the challenges with this. I do feel like I have some concerns about this right now. However, I think this would be probably generally supported quite, happily by folks on council. I'm happy to learn on, as before it goes to council, if there's support for this here. And if I don't vote in favor of that tonight, that doesn't mean that I won't try to present it favorably.
And I'm also happy to work with you separately to try and address some of those concerns.
Okay.
Commissioner Balderrama.
I may have missed this, but is there going to be a special marking that excludes it from, I know, for example, if folks don't have like the real ID, it says like federal limits apply. Will there be a similar marking on these to or to like separate people who go through this pathway versus somebody who has like a citizenship status and all of the documents?
I don't know the answer to that question. That's something that I could look into and try and figure out, but I don't know. Commissioner Hall.
Yeah, I would say, actually, I did read the bill, and it would say something like not valid for federal identification or citizenship or something like that. It would say something like that. And on the other point about, like, as far as people knowing who you say you are and all that, the bill does require some form of some form of identifying documents, not necessarily those that confirm citizenship, though.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. Tim, when I read it, I thought that it said that you were not required to. That's why, that was where my concerns came from. And so I just may need to understand them a little bit better.
So yeah, Commissioner Parsons.
The first whereas clause, I also wanted to strike and then move forward. Personally, I would like to see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th whereas clause, whereas granted driver's licenses and state issued identification cards to undocumented immigrants is an important part of making our streets safer for everyone who uses them, as number 1. And then I don't really care where the rest of the other whereases go. But that is sort of my tweak. And then I'm comfortable voting on it now to send to council. And just want to remind everyone, this is at state level. I think this is going to be a major improvement for folks that live in our community. The super minute tweaks, I think we can trust our elected officials to figure that stuff out. Anyway, I'm in full support.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, I'm on board with striking that first clause, adding state IDs, and also, yeah, we can move the 5th one up to the top. I think those were all the changes that we talked about. I don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritty of editing this, but if people have serious concerns or things they want to address, we can certainly take a little more time to do that, because I do want folks to feel comfortable with this before we move it forward. I'm gonna just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in, since it's hard for me to see hands when we're in screen share mode. All right, sounds like there are no further comments. So I'm going to give Kayla a second to unshare, and then great. So can I get a motion for the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission to approve the resolution in support of Michigan Senate Bills 433 and 434 of 2021 and Michigan House of Representatives Bills HB 4835 and HB 4836 of 2021 as amended? So I need a motion. So Commissioner Parsons, and seconded by Balderrama. And can we have everyone in favor physically raise your hand? All those opposed? Are there any abstentions? Commissioner Summers, your camera is off, so I'm not seeing a vote from you one way or the other. We'll call that oh, yep, in favor. Okay, great. So motion passes unanimously. Kayla, did you have a question?
I was just gonna see, couldn't see if anyone had raised their hand, so it was unanimous. Okay, thank you.
Yep, it was unanimous. Thanks so much, everyone. Councilmember Briggs, I'm happy to talk with you later on to sort of dig into some of the details of the bills. All right, now it's time for staff reports and updates. Commissioner Hess.
All right, commissioners. So I'm going to go through the transportation project updates. I have 25 minutes. Man, I've never had 25 minutes for this. I am going to take my time. All right. So on the resurfacing project, there is a website. So if you are curious about which projects that entails, you can always visit that website. There's more up-to-date information that's shared there. Construction is scheduled to start this week. I don't know if it has, but we'll I'm looking at Nick. Has it started? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, sure. We'll say it started.
I believe it has, or the very beginnings of it are happening now.
Very good. And so the first round is looking at Baldwin, Brockman, Crestland, Eastover, Furdon, and St. Francis are the first set of streets that are coming on. And then repaving of asphalt paths is also part of this contract. There will be a focus on Packard, and that will start in early June. Plymouth Road, Phase 2, which is from Murfin to Lower Broadway. This is a preventive maintenance project, but it does include the addition of buffer bike lanes in both directions. Getty's Road water main, I think we said there's no real changes to the roadway except for the fact that the road will be closed and there'll be a lot of detours. That work is expected to begin in early June. South Industrial concrete pavement repairs. This does include addition of a bike lane and a road diet in the 4-lane segment immediately south of Stimson, so in front of the bowling alley. Work began on May 10th and is expected to complete in July. Scioto Church Phase 2, which runs from Maple to 7th. This is a water main, stormwater. It also includes resurfacing and installation of bike lanes and new sidewalks and crosswalks. That project is still on schedule. Well, it had some delays, but it's still expected to begin in July of 2021. Sidewalk gaps. The ones that are currently identified are Barton Drive, Boardwalk Drive, Jackson Avenue, Scioto Church Road, Stimson Street, Yost and Eli, and Manchester. And the schedule for their implementation is identified in the report, ranging from late summer to early fall for the most part. Huron street improvements. These are kind of exciting because we're getting some movement from MDOT on some things that have not been possible in the past. So leading pedestrian intervals, as you may recall, this is when pedestrians are giving kind of a head start into the crosswalk in advance of the light turning green for vehicles. Those are going to be put in at intersections between 1st and Division along Huron, so that's a big deal. 3rd and Chapin, the full signal, that installation is currently underway, and I think it might even be done by now. There is some restricted right turn movements as well. Those are planned for later this summer. And then there is a new turn, left green arrow, permissive protected left turn at 5th, right in front of City Hall. That has been installed, and that work is now complete as well. Bridge maintenance, construction has been completed on the Island Drive Bridge, but it is ongoing on Broadway and Fuller. Again, there's no changes to the bridges. This is just kind of preventive maintenance to make sure that they don't fall apart on us. People-friendly streets. This is the DDA's project, construction for First and Ashley, and the restoration of the two-way traffic is anticipated to be done by later this summer in 2021. Healthy streets we already talked about, so I'll jump over that. Lower Town Mobility Study, the big thing I want to bring to your attention here is that the 3rd public meeting will be held June 10th. It will still be virtual, so it'll be hosted via Zoom. And I just forwarded along an announcement to Kayla, which I'm sure she'll share with you in the next day or so, if you're interested in participating in that. There is an update on the Jackson High Lake I-94 East ramp. I believe the turning radius into the High Lake, I think that's the Sister Lakes neighborhood. I believe that turning radius has been rectified. I saw some cones out there. I drove by there the other day, so I think that has been done. And that's all gearing up for a signal that's going in at that intersection. I think MDOT will be starting that work soon because I see a lot of cones and such being ready to be placed for maintenance of traffic out there. And then the last thing is the transportation plan update, which you know a lot about since you heard it at your last meeting. We did present it to a work session of City Council on May 10th. And it seemed to be pretty well received. We are taking it back to City Council for final adoption on June 7th. As you may recall, they have kind of three options. They have to, it's kind of all or nothing. They either vote it up, vote it down, or they can refer it back to the Planning Commission with direction on, changes that might be needed. But we are expecting to take it to City Council it is scheduled to go to City Council on June 7th. And that concludes the updates I wanted to provide.
Great, thanks so much. I was just having a moment where I was like, did the comprehensive transportation plan pass City Council yet? Like I sort of lost track, so that's helpful. Next up is liaison reports. Any commissioners who specifically serve as a liaison to another body or organization are invited to provide brief reports and updates. All right, I'm not seeing any. Oh, yeah, Commissioner Lee.
Sure. Just from the Planning Commission, one of the things that we visited was the home ordinance. So it's not specifically related to transportation, but just wanted to let everybody know that it did pass or recommended for passage. But we took a much can't do metalworking, you can't do. And then we went actually more towards performance standards so that we try to broaden it. We got a lot of community feedback on how being too specific or restrictive may actually impede on kind of creative arts that people may do at their homes. So, I mean, we discussed, do we go artisanal custom or can we work the language? But we elected to go with a much more broader, you can't emit, certain amounts of noise, you can't have smells permeating to other properties, etc. So I did want to let you guys know that there's been a much more broader home ordinance revision that's going to come, I think, to City Council. So just wanted to give that update. That was as of yesterday. So,
oh, that sounds great. Yeah, and I know there are a fair number of home bike mechanic kinds of situations where I actually do think that there's some transportation relevance to that one. So thanks. Commissioner Smith.
I just wanted to share that we are in the planning process for our June public meetings to showcase or to outline the final plan for the August service restoration that is coming up for the ride. And probably the number one comment that we got back or topic was about the proposed end of Gold Ride. So tomorrow evening, I'll be presenting to our board an alternative for them to consider. So I would expect them to debate that and possibly give us direction tomorrow or give us more direction to go back and think more. So I just wanted to let folks know that that was upcoming, and happy to answer any questions and can do it offline.
Great, thank you. Any others? Councilmember Briggs.
Thanks. So Monday night was our budget meeting for those of you who did not follow it. You've already heard about the healthy streets that went through. There's a couple other things in terms of what changed since the budget that you saw presented to Transportation Commission. And I'd like to thank Raymond and Kayla for doing an additional meeting with Marty Prashant and Brad as well for being there to we had some additional questions that provided a lot more information and helped to inform some different budget amendments that I put forward, and which I worked with pretty closely with Molly on that. One of the things that you saw presented that shifted a little bit was how the county mental health rebate funds would be spent, the 20% for pedestrian safety. So there's still the same funding, $135,000 for uncontrolled crosswalk lighting needs. The existing streetlight replacements was reduced by a little more than half, but still there's $100,000 in for that. Ultimately, $65,000 was $75,000 was allocated for communications, And then additionally, another $100,000, there was $100,000 for traffic calming on major streets analysis. That was not originally included, and $150,000 for curb extensions and center line hardening, slow turn wedges. So a few things that were in the comprehensive plan that we have not yet adopted on council. So it makes sense that they were not necessarily incorporated into the budget yet. Do have funding for them. And then another thing that was funding for 3 quick build safety projects and for putting forward the transportation plan implementation strategy. So there's $300,000 for those efforts. So there's a lot of great things that'll be moved forward from already existing in the transportation work, and a few other things as well. And then you also might be interested to know that a DEI position was also included.
That's great. Yeah, I was very pleased to see all of those changes. Thank you. Other liaison reports. Okay, moving on to general commission member communications. So all commissioners are invited to provide reports and updates. Commissioner Hadamaki.
Yeah, at the start of the pandemic, staff made a couple of changes to signalized crosswalks to implement the leading pedestrian intervals at I think all of them. And at many of them, they eliminated the need for pedestrians to press the beg button to cross to get the pedestrian cross signal. But I've noticed in the last few weeks that those intersections have started reverting back to where pedestrians have to press the button. And I guess I wanted to register my opinion that I think we should be going in the opposite direction, especially on a lot of the intersections, or maybe most of them, where it doesn't change the timing anyway of the light cycle. I don't see a reason to revert back to the status where pedestrians rush up and make sure they hit the button, or else lose their opportunity. So that's just something I've noticed over the last couple of weeks, and I'm not sure if it's intentional or not, but that's all.
Yeah, Commissioner Hadamaki, thanks for bringing that up. It is intentional. When we call them pedestrian recalls, but you're right to call it beg buttons as well. At select intersections, especially those near the hospital and some other key locations, we eliminated the need to push the button to get the PED signal, especially at the height of the pandemic and the early onset of the pandemic. It was really twofold. It was really meant to limit the need for people to touch surfaces where many people were touching them, and then also to socially distance, right? So that people wouldn't have to feel like they have to walk up and push the button if there are already people standing there, because sometimes people don't know. The reason why we pulled it back is now that we know more about how kind of the disease is transmitted, and it doesn't seem to be as transmissible by surface touch, we felt like some of that underlying rationale for it was not there anymore. I know some communities, you're absolutely right, are moving to eliminating the push buttons altogether and just having that PED recall cycle through. One of the reasons we were a little resistant to do that here, not to say we won't revisit it, is because since we do have leading pedestrian intervals at every intersection, if every intersection then has PED recall, where it will give the PED signal plus that 3-second head start for pedestrians, over the network, that starts to build up, right? Along a corridor and throughout the course of the day, where you're giving kind of extra green time for pedestrian movement when there's no pedestrian there. And so that was one of the reasons why we thought, well, if we had to pick between leading pedestrian interval or PED recall, we thought leading pedestrian interval for its safety benefit was more desirable. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but it is something that we can kind of look at as part of our Vision Zero safety campaign in terms of how effective that is as a countermeasure. So I appreciate you bringing it up. Again, this is part of this, trying to see what works the best and accommodate some of those people in our corridors.
Thank you both. Commissioner Summers.
So I would suggest that when there is any question of safety, period, you should probably, go with the safest route, no matter what. which I believe is the 3-second lead for the pedestrian.
Thank you. I have one too, which is that I just wanted to extend my thanks to Commissioner Parsons and Councilmember Briggs and our staff, Kayla and Raymond, for all of the work that they did over the last month on the city budget amendments. I know that that came sort of unexpectedly from our last meeting, and it was a heavy lift, but I'm really thrilled with what ended up going into the budget, and I think it's gonna enable some really exciting stuff, some good changes this coming year, and especially that it'll make sure that our spending aligns better with the transportation plan, which isn't quite in place yet, but is coming soon. So I just wanted to extend my thanks to you for all of that work, because it was great. So if there are no other communications, I'm going to do a quick call for agenda items. Kayla, did you want to talk about sort of what we've got coming up for June real quick?
Sure. I'll just give a quick update that we are expecting to receive an update from the DDA about Division Street and State Street. We've been in contact with them for that presentation. The capital improvement plan, we typically receive an update, a summertime update, and we've slated it for June. I'll be in touch with staff and confirm that that's on target. And we had a placeholder for South Main Street crosswalk improvements, Mosley, Keach, Hoover, and Davis. So I'll do some follow-up and see if that one's ready as well. That's what was in the work plan or conversations that I've had recently. I think it's also worth noting that Chair Kleiman and Vice Chair Boland and I had a conversation recently about sort of work plan cleanup and looking at outstanding agenda item requests. So we may be reaching out to individual commissioners for follow-up on those items to see where things stand, if a commissioner requested or suggested a specific agenda item, whether they were taking initiative on preparing something for commission discussion, or if it's still of interest and a request for staff to prepare for. So just something to expect. And if I can make one more quick announcement, I wanted to just make a plug. It's an email that I'll be sending you shortly, but the city is kicking off an equitable engagement steering committee. We've talked previously with this commission about equitable engagement, and that initiative, I think, has been mentioned, but the call for applications to the steering committee is currently posted, and it's open until June 7th. So we'd like to encourage all commissioners to share that widely within your network. I'll send you the resources so you have that and can pass it along, but wanted to make a plug that if you or others in your network are interested in being part of that conversation, we would welcome your applications and your participation in the process.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Feltz, did you have an agenda item?
I do. It involves staff time, so fitting it in sometime in the next 4 to 6 months or so would be where I would look for it in time-wise. But I think that it's time to look at how successful we've been at getting council to go along with our recommendations and look at whether there's improvement in how we present stuff and how we do things in that regard. I mean, we've also, I think now we're on our 4th city council person, and the effectiveness has ranged widely. But I have some concerns about being listened to and all that. But I think in general, it's just good to evaluate it and see, is this working? Because that's really where a lot of our recommendations go to be effective.
Yeah, those are great points. And yeah, you and I can also talk separately a little bit about how about that. That'd be great. Councilmember, great. Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. Kind of to that point, one of the things that Transportation Commission recommended a few years ago, I think now, was the traffic calming, revisions to the traffic calming program. And I don't know, in light of sort of the new plan, if staff feels like those recommendations are still ones that they support moving forward, but it does seem that it might be worthwhile for the commission to just take another look at those and see if they're still relevant. And if they are, maybe council would be more responsive if presented with them again. And I think as you're talking about evaluating whether or not how the responsiveness of council to the commission, I think also just it's also important for staff to be taking a look and making sure that the process that has this was kind of a new commission that was put into place with kind of another step in the process. Like how productive does it feel? I'm not trying. Can we make the commission more productive from staff's perspective too, in terms of the step in the process? Maybe it's working great. Maybe there's tweaks that would help. I don't know. And then I know part of there's just so many short-term recommendations that are in the plan that I imagine that staff would be completely overwhelmed with if you're trying to deal with them all at once. I know that one of the recommendations is the development of a subgroup of the Transportation Commission that would work on plan implementation. I could imagine that subcommittee might be staff supported at times, but I also think that there might be a need to identify is there work that we as a body could do to help move some of those policy recommendations forward as quickly as possible to council, so that we're getting policies in place that support the work that's staff wants to do.
So that sounds like that would be for post council approval of the transportation plan, an agenda item soon after that for us to find if there's a way to help with prioritization in addition to the sort of existing prioritization processes for the short-term changes. Is that
correct?
Okay, great. We've done a great job of filling our 2 hours tonight, everyone. I didn't know if we were going to do it. I'm not seeing any other hands. So with 2 minutes to go, if there are no objections, we will adjourn our May 19th, 2021 meeting. Looking for objections. Oh, go ahead. Yes. I kind of thought you were joking, but go ahead.
No. Sorry. I'm really sorry about this. It'll be really brief, I promise. I do have to mention it just because I did hear from, I know all the council members got it, but we had a small business, Arcadian, and Rhonda Gilpin, who did speak about all of the road closures that have been happening, kind of that tactical urbanism. And I would be remiss to say that some of our small businesses on State Street are really hurting from just, even if it's blocking off all of the traffic flow, using just like construction cones. She's said that there's been out of town visitors who think it's just under construction and closed so that they don't even visit, and that's very difficult for them to even access the store. So I just wanted to put that on people's radar because it is a conversation. I didn't see any response to it, but I did want to mention it so that people are aware that the smaller businesses are hurting, or at least they are, saying that, hey, their business is being hampered by the road closures and using construction devices to, demonstrate this. So it looks like it's just a construction zone when it's really not. So maybe thinking about different materiality that helps to not convey that it's, under construction, but using some other materials. Again, I'm all for more pedestrian walkability and maximizing that the use. But I mean, I want to represent, the small business concerns that are being legitimately posed by, again, that kind of tactical urbanism of the DDA. So I just bringing that up. Sorry to bring that last second, but
no, it's okay. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Take two. Looking for objections to adjourning our meeting tonight. Seeing no objections, our meeting is adjourned. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.